Welcome back to Terror Talk on Terror Express, where Jimmy Presley returns, and we are going to be talking about Friday the 13th, Part 2 in this episode. You know, Jimmy is author of A Bloody Halloween, which is available now on Amazon. And Jimmy, where else is that available?
Any legit online bookstore, it's there.
There you go. Blood and gore, body count, very graphic novel being made into a screenplay.
Yep.
So we are going to talk about the first sequel to the 1980 classic Friday the 13th. And Jimmy, what I'm going to ask you right off the bat here about Friday the 13th Part 2. What's your favorite kill in Part 2?
My favorite death is probably Mark's death in the wheelchair, just because
Hmm.
it was so sudden the way it happened, and it's pretty graphic.
And
It's
brutal.
tied with Scott, his death in the foot snare. To me, because once again, it's someone who's absolutely at the mercy of Jason. Doesn't even have a chance for defense.
Right.
Just that to me, those two kills, and for the whole franchise, actually stick out. So not just part two, but just he had them where he wanted them.
Yeah, he did. And I think that Part 2 to me, I think the kills compared to Part 1 are a little more visceral.
Yes.
Like you have Mark in the wheelchair, you have Scott hanging upside down, you have Sandra who has Jeff on top of her, so she can't move.
Oh yeah.
Um, and she didn't really even have time to talk at first. When you see someone coming through your door with a spear, I don't think your mind quite recognizes it as reality. You would question it. You would think, is this Ted playing a joke again?
Right.
Like how he jumped out of the fire, and it probably wasn't until that last minute just before he brought the spear down that she realized, oh shit, this is really happening.
Yep. That's what I think exactly.
Yeah, and I think the only death in part two, which I mean, it's a terrifying scene, is I'm going to say Vicky, who is my favorite character in part two. I crushed pretty hard on Vicky through through most of my adolescent years, and I was fortunate to tell Lauren Marie Taylor that story. I have had her on the show, so listeners, go check out Lauren Marie Taylor. Her episode is called "She's Dead." It's available now on season one of the Terror Express. But um, her character, when she was getting killed, I get the fact that she was terrified, and I get that she was kind of shocked and seeing her friends there, but she was right next to a door. She could have ran out. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Vicky's death?
Yeah, but I'll tell you, she was one of my favorites too, and
Hmm.
I was fortunate enough to I got her autograph to a friend when she did the Crystal Lake, the thing they do every year up at the camp where they stay over the weekend. And yeah, I mean, she was right by the door. I think she was gone. She was in shock. I don't even think it occurred to her that there was a door. She
Yeah,
was just in that realm where you just don't come back. And the fear took her. And that really
yeah,
sucks, man. I'd have loved to have seen her put up a fight. I think she could have, but
yeah.
you know,
And the only reason I and I'm gonna nitpick this isn't due to writing or due to the way that it was uh set up and carried through. It was just the fact that it was Vicky. Vicky was my favorite. Vicky should have been Final Girl, like I had mentioned in the first Friday the 13th episode. You tend to have another Final Girl in mind out of the
yeah.
victims, and Vicky would have been that. I would have loved to have seen her make it through.
Oh, yeah.
And part two was the first movie that I had ever seen. I was 10 years old, and I was so scared. I was trembling. I had to keep changing the channel because I just couldn't keep watching it. But the scene with Vicky was the one that I will always remember. Is that one that stuck out to me as
Yeah.
horrifyingly scary and also very sad because my crush was just killed.
I know. You know, that movie, Vicky, I loved her. I think I was young, but I saw the writing on the wall that they were kind of setting up for Jenny to be the
Hmm.
survivor. But so I don't think it shocked me in the same way it did you. But I will throw this in real quick. Just on that note of the scene, that's when you first see Jason in that one with Vicky's death, and that did for to Windows what Mrs. Voorhees Under the Bed did to me. You
Hmm.
know, the same kind of
Oh
effect.
yeah.
As a child, I was scared of windows and beds from
Hmm.
just these two movies alone. So like, what's next? The bathtub.
No, I totally understand with the whole jump scare of the window at the end. A lot of people call that the dream sequence. I think it
Mhm.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. I want to
Yeah.
keep saying it happened, but did
I
it? I mean, Muffy might have been dead. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, I was totally agreeing with you. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it really happened.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary. That's all I know is I didn't see that
Yeah.
coming any more than Jason coming out of the lake in part
No, I
one.
didn't either. I still consider that window jump the best jump scare in the history of horror to date.
Yeah. Oh, I do too. Let me tell you, I still have trouble with windows on dark nights.
Hmm. Hmm.
What's out there? What's about to come in? It's weird how
Yes, yes, absolutely. And a lot of filmmakers now with the cinematography, the style of it, you can pretty much tell when something's about to happen. You can see the setup. You can tell the way the camera's moving or the way someone's walking backwards or the way the main character is on the one third of the screen and they got the two thirds wide open to show what's going to happen.
Yep.
When Jenny was in front of that window, you didn't get that. It was just a
Oh,
simple movement of the camera that would signify somebody was going to be jumping into that frame at that moment. It was a total shock. And I tell you what, I think I hit my head on the ceiling and my shoes never left the ground. It was that kind of scare.
yeah.
It was, it was, it was brilliant.
It was just. Uh, I'm picturing it. You did such a good job at describing there. It was me too. I mean, I remember seeing one and two early on. I
Hmm.
don't remember which I saw first. I said in the other one, one is probably my favorite, but next to that with
Yeah.
Jason, part two, just from the deaths, the scares, the look of Jason, again, the
Oh yeah.
isolation of the woods. So,
Yeah.
wow, again.
Yeah. And we have actually two Jasons. We have, and there was a pretty big war between the two actors. You have the face of Jason, and then you have the actual Jason. Warrington
Oh, yeah.
Gillette obviously is the face of Jason. Who, when they filmed the window scene, he said he was actually really pissed because he missed his mark or something and bounced off the window, and he hurt himself pretty bad. So when it was when they were filming it, and he jumped through, and Amy Steele was standing there, obviously Jenny. He was genuinely pissed, and I believe, I'm loosely quoting here, he really wanted to hurt her in
I
that
don't doubt
moment.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
You could see it in his eye,
you
literally
could
his
see it.
eye.
Yeah, yeah, that that was a great thing. You mentioned Muffy. Um, Obviously, I'm an animal lover. I have to assume that that animal that Jeff and Sandra found in the woods was not Muffy. I'm gonna say that
Yeah.
was a whole different animal. And if the jump scare at the end wasn't a dream and it was reality, in my book, as I stated, Muffy was alive because she came back through the door and Paul opened the door and there's the dog. So Muffy is still alive.
Yeah. That works for me. I've spent too long trying to decipher the end, and then you go into three, and it shows Jason pull the machete out of his shoulder at the altar of his mother's head, and yet when he jumps through that window, he's still got the machete in his shoulder. It shows it very well in that slow mo shot. I love that. So I just thought, you know what, it's another movie. I like to think it happened too. Uh,
Hmm.
Either way, it scared the crap out of me.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And a lot of people also say that Alice was a dream sequence, but Alice's corpse is at the foot of Jason's mother at the end. It's the
Right.
5 year rotted corpse with the ice pick still in her temple.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no argument there. I hate to do
Mm-mm.
that because I know a lot of fans are wanting to say
Yeah.
what to say, but it's no, she's
And
there.
now another controversial conversation that part two often has is Paul alive? Did he survive or was he a victim? What do you think?
I think Jason went through the window, grabbed Jenny, and then after the aftermath would have been Paul, of course, trying to you
Hmm.
know fight fight Jason for his girlfriend's life, and
Right.
obviously something went awry there, and they both disappeared into the woods. Um,
Right.
you know,
And
right. So that's it.
here's one of the things too. I'll be releasing our conversation in part three next, obviously on all the streaming platforms. But if you listen to the episode three when it's released, we will be discussing Paul's fate and the news announcement when Edna is watching the news at the beginning of part three. It literally states how many bodies were found strewn across the campgrounds of part two. And if you do the math, it doesn't make sense that Paul would be included. So check out our part three episode coming up next after you listen to this one, and let us know what you think. Did Paul survive, or was Paul one of the victims? A lot of argument is in the screenplay or in the book he was killed off, or you know, Victor Miller, Ron, whoever, the writers of the screenplay would say, oh, he was originally killed off, but you know what? It didn't make film, so it's not canon in my book. If if
Yep.
if I don't see it on the big screen, it didn't happen. Or if it's not
Yep.
mentioned on the big screen, at least it didn't happen. If they would have said they found Paul's body, okay, now it's canon. But no, you end Paul's story with Paul, where's Paul? And then they never answer. So
Yeah. I mean, anything could have happened. It's funny
mhm,
because we talked in the episode of part one about Alice, crossing into the first, from the first movie to the second and dying, uh, kind of like the Marion Crane death again from Psycho.
mhm,
I know they talked about for part three, and also I think after five and after six about a crossover, or not a crossover, but the character advancing into the next story, and none of them ever worked out, except for Alice, if I'm correct on
mhm.
that. I think the only character that kind of went from one film to the next would have been Tommy later, but it just, to me, goes to show, I think the power of the writing back then. I don't know. I don't know what made them jump from that, but I would have loved to have seen more of the Jenny character. But then we wouldn't have had,
Yeah,
Chris and Debbie and all them from part three, maybe. So
right,
it's just,
right.
it's tough.
I believe Amy said she was offered, Amy Still was offered the role to reprise Jenny in part three, but she turned it down. She went on to say that she regretted not taking it because it was supposed to take place in the hospital,
Right. Yeah. I remember that.
which
That would have been a good story.
would have been the same year Halloween 2 came out, so you would be able to
Yeah.
tell without a doubt that they were definitely competing and clamoring against each other.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I believe didn't Halloween 2 come out in 1981? I don't want to give the wrong information. I know they came out pretty close
Yeah.
to each other. I don't want to say they came out the same year. If I might be off by a year, but they did come out relatively close to each other.
Right. Yeah. It was 81. It was 3 years after the
Yeah,
Halloween one. Right.
right. So we would have had Michael and Jason both in the hospital trying to get their target. But
Yeah.
I'm glad it turned out the way it did. I love Jenny. She's a strong final girl, but Chris is my favorite. Like I said, part three is my favorite movie of all time, not just in the franchise, but like ever made. So um, I'm glad three is what it was. But part two will always be magic for me. It was, like I said, the first one that I had ever seen. What was your least favorite kill in part two?
Let's see. Oh, that's a tough one because they were all pretty good. I'd say, um, I don't want to, I don't want to put her in a bad light, but it probably would have been, Vicky.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, she got her leg slashed, and then she just it looked like he stabbed her, I guess, in the chest with a knife. And she slid down the wall. It was all, the buildup was really good, but I thought it might have been weak compared to the rest
Yeah.
of the kills in that movie.
I I like the way they executed the scene, other than the fact that she could have ran. I get she was paralyzed with fear. I have to say my least favorite in the installment would be Terry, only for the simple reason is it's an off-screen kill, and that
Yeah.
was the only off-screen kill in part two, and I felt like they could have, you know, given her something. Now you see her body obviously at the base of um Pam's Pamela's shrine, and
Right.
you do see the side of her face. If you see it when I believe it's when Paul and Jason are struggling, they show Terry laying there, and you can tell the side of her face. It looks like her cheek was almost cut off. If you
Ouch.
look
Yeah.
at it, yeah, there's a really good shot. And now in the book, in the novelization of part two, Terry was slammed, the side of her head was slammed against a tree. So if you keep that in mind when you watch part two and you see Terry's corpse laying there with the side of her face, banged
And
up
it
the way it
fits.
is, it could fit
Yeah.
absolutely. I do
Absolutely.
believe he definitely slammed her against a tree, and she's in the woods, so obviously there's plenty of trees for that opportunity.
Oh yeah. Yeah, speaking of trees, it reminds me of my third favorite death in that movie, and it's old Ralph. You know, he was kind of being a little bit of a pervert, but his death always scared me, and you just reminded me when you talked about the trees because of the way Jason wraps that barbed wire from hand to hand,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
get it was just, wow.
Yeah. Yes. And then when he's in the pantry later on at the end, and Jenny
Oh yeah,
jumps out the window. Now we talked about the window scene being a jump scare. There's a lot of
oh yeah,
tremendous jump scares in part two. You've got the pitchfork through the roof of the car. You've got the pitchfork through the door when she's standing next to the door. You got him crashing through the window when she's still in the cabin before she even, before the end of the movie. So there's a lot of
yeah,
great
and
jump scares. And I think that's why
there
part
were,
two stayed at the top of my list for so long.
yeah, me too. And well, it's funny because I never really put that together, but you're right. Jason goes to the window after her, which she's at the sink
Hmm.
before she goes to the pantry.
Yeah.
And that again is another window scare. Maybe my little psyche,
Yes. Uh-huh.
put that
Yeah.
together.
Jason
Yeah.
fucked you up for Windows.
Yeah, he did.
And then when Jenny breaks through the window and she jumps out, that was actually Amy Steele. So that looked like a stunt that she had actually done.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if there's any record of Amy talking about that, and perhaps she made stunt stunt person pay. I know a lot of people would say, "Oh, I did this in the movie and I got paid for it." I'm wondering if that might be an example of that. And if you watch part three, there's a scene where I'm sorry, Chris, when Chris jumps out the window and she lands from pretty high, it
Oh
looks
yeah.
like she may have done her own stunt in that too. So these characters, they're badass.
They are badass because every time I watch part two, especially, I see Jenny hit the frame of that window and the
Mm-hmm.
whole frame board gives out, and she
Mm-hmm.
just drops onto that pile of logs, and she hits hard. And then you're with Dana or Chris, like you said, it was the same. I mean, it looked like she was out of frame, which had to be 6 or 7 feet when her legs hit the
Mm-hmm.
ground. Yeah,
Yes.
that looked. They were badass. That's a good word.
Yeah, they were, and I love the fact that Jenny was the smart final girl out of the franchise. She majored in psychology. And I
I
love the
love
fact
that.
that what saved Ted's life was the bar and the him staying there and waiting for the bar to fall down on him. Was there anything else in part two that you liked or disliked that you wanted to mention before this episode ended?
I think everybody that watches the first two, especially, they get captured not only by the evil intention of the antagonist Jason, but or Mrs. Voorhees in part one, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
what I love the most, and this may be a little off the question, but I think it's just that setting, the Packanack Lodge and the
Mm-hmm.
cabins, and it's just the way that they filmed it, and
Mm-hmm.
there's this magic that you can't grab in films today, and I'm not putting every movie down. Just I can't seem to find that
No,
same
I
kind of
I
magic.
totally get it. The 1980s definitely had that magic that's never been replicated. The 80s, especially the Friday the 13th films, especially the early Friday the 13th films. I'm going to say the first four
Oh yeah,
captured that. That was the lightning in a bottle four times.
it's just like I said, Watchmen was like magic. There's just something there. I don't care what the critics said at the time, that the trash or the gore. It was just there was magic and true
That
fright.
and that's what was magic in itself was when the critics would trash these movies. You'd want to see them because if Siskel and Ebert are saying this movie's an abomination, here's Betsy Palmer's address. Write her a letter or go ask her why she made this movie, which was bullshit. They never should have done that. But it just tells you if they're trashing this movie, I'm gonna want to go see it and I'm gonna love it.
Yeah, I wish I'd been 6, 7 years old when they came out. Like I said, they
Yeah.
were a little old by the time I saw them. I guess 5, 6 years old. But wow, the impact is still
Hmm.
there. Just
Yes,
amazing
it,
time.
it it is definitely still there. Absolutely. Well, Jimmy, I want to thank you for joining us in this episode where we got to talk about Friday the 13th, part two, where Jason was 4'11", and in the next episode where we talk about Friday the 13th, part three, he is 6'2". So
Yeah,
Jason, over the course of that night between part two and three, grows a lot.
He
Well,
did.
so
He got
watch
hunchback
out.
too.
Yes, so watch for that in the next episode that we're discussing. You can reach out to me on Cameo for the Terror Express podcast if you'd like a message sent out to anybody for only $3. All proceeds raised there will go to animal charities, foundations, and organizations to help animals in distress and need. I'm Jason Bradford, your host, and with us was Jimmy Presley. Jimmy, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to talking to you about part three and the rest of the P8.
Yeah, that sounds great. I had a great time. I appreciate it.